In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
This interview is part of a GSV oral history project titled A Time of Change, Voices of the 1960s and 70s. This is Leslie Clemenson and I am interviewing Ian Penrose at his home in Kew, Victoria. The date is the 7th of August 2024. Ian, would you like to tell us a little bit of your early background, the background to your life, your early childhood?
Thanks, Leslie. I'm delighted to be involved in this pilot project for GSV on oral history. But in talking about my early life, don't expect any words of wisdom. It's just one person's reflection upon life as a young person. I was born in 1949 in Coleraine, a town in Victoria's Western District, in the Coleraine Hospital. My parents, Joe and Marion, already had two boys, my older brothers, Billy and Bobby. So I was number three, the last of their children. Our home was called Milton Hill. It was a rural property of about 500 acres, undulating Western District country, cleared for grazing and crops, but fortunately still with some wonderful red gum trees still standing. My earliest memory isn't of an event. My earliest memory is in fact sitting in this cane chair, which was a family heirloom that my mother had sat in when she was a baby, and my children and grandchildren have also sat in it, and I can still feel the roughness of the raffia on the back of my legs. So that's my earliest memory. I once asked my mother, why was I called Ian? She said, well, your brothers were christened William and Robert, but their names were corrupted to Billy and Bobby. So we chose a name that couldn't be corrupted, hence Ian. But then she let slip that when I would follow her as the baby in the family to things like her tennis games, because she played tennis, I'd be clinging onto her skirt and her friends would call me Little Marion. So I have a little picture of Mother Marion and little baby Marion, because I was meant to be the girl in the family which never arrived, so that's where I got that name. But I haven't told anybody else that story, so please don't share it around. My earliest memory of an event was getting lost in the bush. My father took Bobby and me out on the tractor one day, pulling the superphosphate shredder, and he stopped in the paddock. He went off to do something and said to Bobby, please don't leave the place, play with Ian. So he pulled out some dinky toys, we opened up the back of the shredder, and Bobby, who had amazing memory, would regale stories where we played with dinky toys in the soft white dust. It was a hot day. I got thirsty and said to Bobby, I'm thirsty. He said, we haven't got a drink. I said, I want a drink. And so after a battle of wills, we left the spot and against my father's wishes, started to walk home through the paddock. It was a long walk. And my next memory is arriving up at our front gate, and Father had set in train a research party from the community because his two little babies had left. And I remember my mother holding out her arms, welcoming me, and my brother Bobby staying a little bit back because he knew he was going to get into trouble. So that's my memory of that.
And how long did you live in the Western
We lived there for 5 years. We moved to Geelong. My brothers and I went to a rural school. Connie Werrico was the name of it. It was the first lesson at the school was how to spell the school's name. It was, I still remember, CONNEWIRRICOO. So that's probably the most important thing we learned in our first year of school. I was there just for 1 year. My parents, who only never reached year 10 themselves at school, were desperately keen for their three boys to have an education. So we moved to Geelong for two reasons when I was 5. One is for us to have a better education, and secondly, my father wanted to be an electrician. He was a fourth generation farmer. He would rather have been an electrician, so he went to Geelong, sold the farm, and started off as an apprentice electrician. Quite a bold move. So we moved to Geelong.
Can I just ask, the school that you went to for just 1 year.
It was Connie Worker, yes, yeah.
Was that just a one-teacher school?
It was a one-teacher school that my great-grandfather had helped start with the community. My great-aunt had taught there. So this was in the 1870s. And so I was the fourth generation Penrose boy to go to this one-teacher school. Yes, there were only two in my age group. The school had about, I think, 10 or 20 students when I was there. Yes, so it was a different experience. And when we went to Geelong, we three boys were put into Geelong College, a private school. And we lived in a suburban area of Newtown, in a brick veneer house there. It was a very different experience for us. And Mother was delighted with the move because she was a city girl from Adelaide, never liked the loneliness or the dust or the heat of living on the farm. So for several reasons, we moved to Geelong. And that's where I spent most of my school years, at Geelong College. I can still remember at school the first few years of graduating to get a pen rather than a pencil, and dipping it in a little inkwell on the corner of the wooden desk, and then gradually learning to write on lined paper and copying out the letters in copperplate writing on the school board. So I still remember that vividly. My father sold the farm, and with the money he got from that, he decided to have a very long extended holiday, and so we all went over to England for a year. We caught a ship across the ocean, the SS Strathnaver, I remember it, an old P&O boat, and we three boys enjoyed that ride on the ship, which was about 5 weeks, and went to a school in Devon, rural Devon, called Buckland House School. An interesting school with an interesting history. My father found out about it by reading the London Illustrated News, which was a weekly magazine that was distributed in Australia, and he found an article about this remote school in central Devon and wrote off and enrolled us in it. The school, in fact, the staff and the students had actually not grown up in Devon, they'd grown up in Central Africa, in the colonial country called Tanganyika, and they left in the late 50s to relocate to the building in Devon because of the unrest at the time when Tanganyika was seeking independence from British rule. So we rolled up there. Most of the students, they were all Anglo students, but they were expatriates in Tanganyika. And so we joined them at this very small school. In fact, I have a picture of it here. I think somewhere here, a picture of the school. This is the entire school of Buckland House. It was in an old mansion in central Devon. So I went to school there for a year. I was 9 at the time, and fortunately in the company of my 2 older brothers to look after me at this school. So that's Buckland House School. It's not a school anymore. We returned to Geelong, to Geelong College. And
Can I just ask about the trip?
Yeah.
Because that would have been unusual in the 1950s for a family to take a holiday like that.
Yeah.
I mean, did you know anybody else who
No, it was most unusual.
had a holiday like that?
No, it was unlike my parents entirely. They weren't adventurous people, but for some reason they decided to have this year away. And they spent their year taking Thomas Cook bus tours around Europe and England, and left us in this school in Devon. It was most unusual. The shipboard life, that was the time when people travelled internationally by ship. So it was a very old boat. The boat had been a troop carrier during the Second World War. It was in its last legs when we went on it, but still was comfortable. And as kids, we were looked after in the children's nursery on the ship, with a nurse looking after us, just playing games and sport on the decks and making models and so forth. We enjoyed it thoroughly. And when we came back, we also came back by ship. Went up to England through the Suez Canal and came back round the Cape of Good Hope. Wonderful year away, and we all went back to school with slightly British accents, which would have upset our schoolmates, I'm sure, or been a source of joke. Our school holidays were spent in caravan. My parents loved to caravan. I've got a picture of the caravan here. Here's the caravan, our first caravan. It was like a box on wheels, and there's Bobby and me, or he's now Bob, not Bobby, my father, and we would travel just not very far, but in the caravan. I think we went to Queensland once, but most often Dad would park the caravan at Indented Head, which is a beachside settlement just near Geelong, and we'd park it right on the beach, and so we spent all our summer holidays, which were quite long, at Indented Head. And the caravan was parked there. We would just jump out of our tent. It was right on the beach. Jump out of our tent, play in the sand, play cricket, lots of things. It was great for children. We'd row boats. In fact, one of the stories I want to tell you is that we would hire, brothers and I would hire a little rowing boat. And it was about 1 6pence to hire it for an hour. And our parents saw what fun we were having rowing our boat. They said, "Why don't we have a special family outing?" And Dad said, "Why don't you hire a bigger boat?" So we had this special family outing, and Dad dressed up with his new shorts and smart shirt on. Mum dressed up in a very fancy flowing costume, put a lippy on, and we rowed as a family. Dad took the oars because he wanted to say he could still row a boat from his days on the Glenelg River, and Mum sat on the bow looking very proud, and we 3 boys sat on the back. And it was just after Christmas, and I'd been given for Christmas a set of goggles with snorkel on it and flippers. I decided to try them out, so I waddled down to the boat with my flippers on. We all hopped in, and it was a wonderfully clear day, and I could see the seashells and the weeds and so forth in the water. I thought, gee, I'm going to try out my goggles. So I jumped out. When I came to the surface, the boat wasn't to be seen. I'd capsized the boat when I jumped out. And my most vivid memory is my father's hanging on to the edge of the boat because he couldn't swim. My mother is swimming, not towards the shore, she's swimming out to a speedboat which had come to her rescue. And she had this flowing dress on. She was an ample woman. So my vivid memory is her in this wet dress around her curvy figure, swimming away while this gallant knight was going to save her. This was my event. My father's yelling to my brothers to collect all the belongings which had floated out of the boat. And I went into hiding because I knew I'd be blamed for this event of us capsizing the boat. So that's one of my most vivid memories of our holidays at the beach. And we were there for many years at Indented Head. And I spent the rest of my time at that school. Oh, one event which is interesting was in my final years at school, I was in the school cadets because the school had a cadet corps. It was just at the start of the Vietnam War. And my elder brother Bill is here. He was called up. He didn't go to Vietnam. He served out his time in Australia in the signals. And my brother Bob, he joined the civilian military forces, the CMF, and did week camps. And I was in my school cadet there. I also had to wear a kilt at times too, because of being a Scottish Presbyterian church school, it had to have kilts for the cadets. So that's one of my early memories of, I guess, a significant activity at the time, which was the Vietnam War.
Do you remember how your family felt when your elder brother was called up?
Yeah, my father had served in the Second World War, so they just felt it was the right duty to do, and Bill wasn't shy about joining. He was doing electronics at the Gordon Institute of Technology, so he was interested in technology, and so when he went into the army, they gave him a job in signals, which fulfilled his role as an electronics person. They weren't the least bit disturbed. I guess they were delighted that he wasn't sent overseas and didn't have to hold a gun. Yeah, so I don't remember any angst at the time. Yeah. Here we are. Here are the 3 boys in our Geelong College uniforms. The school was incredibly traditional, that they expected you to wear your uniforms whenever you were out in the public. So we went shopping in the weekend on, say, a shopping day, we were expected to wear our uniforms. And when I look back at our family albums, it's amazing how often we wore our uniforms when we visited relatives, not just going to school, but when we had special occasions, we put a uniform. And often with our silly little caps we used to wear, school. So that's a picture of us in uniform. And you notice Mother's wearing a cap and gloves, so it must have been a special occasion, this. And that's our Ford Custom line.
It's a very typical photo of the 1950s.
It is. That would have been taken in, I guess, about 1958 or something like that. Yeah.
Did you not have like suits that you wore?
No, this was the suit.
So that was your suit,
That was
your
our suit.
uniform.
And so it was our formal gear. It was also our school uniform. And in fact, even when we were in England and the school I was there wore a uniform, we wear that on the school holidays over there. And when we came back to Australia, parents took us around to revisit all our relatives, my grandparents and my cousins. We wore our English school uniform. Reflection upon the clothing style at the time.
I guess, maybe it was just saving money, you didn't have to have a formal
That's right.
attire other than the uniform.
That's right, indeed. It was an all-boys school, and our street was filled with families of boys. I had no sisters, neither my mother or father had a sister, so I grew up in a world without girls except for my mother. And so one of my strongest memories of school was when we got to dancing classes with the local girls' school, and that was a real thrill. It was in my year 10 it was, and that's where I met my future wife, at dancing classes. It was a new world for us I didn't know girls, let alone understood them. I'll be honest, I still don't understand them, but at least I met them from dancing classes. From school, I was in the science mathematics stream, not the history and art stream, and I followed school into University of Melbourne to study science. That was seen as natural. For me, it was just a natural progression to go. And at University of Melbourne, I enrolled in the Bachelor of Science course focusing on science, physics and mathematics. And
I think that's something that's very different to now, that you had to just stay science. Now you can timetable, history and science, but in the 1960s you couldn't do that.
No, it wasn't. I remember the engineers were told they had to take one art subject, but for the scientists, no. And it was filled. I mean, the university course had 4 subjects a year, so it was, in my first year, it was physics, chemistry, pure mathematics and applied mathematics, and that was they were the same subjects I'd done in year 12 at school. So it was just a follow-on of that specialisation. So physics and maths were my thing, and that was my degree speciality. And moved into Trinity College, one of the residential colleges attached to the University of Melbourne. And because my parents lived in Geelong, it wasn't appropriate for me to stay at home, so I moved into this regional college. It was a time when the Commonwealth scholarships were readily available, so no fees. And I was fortunate to win a scholarship at the college, so residential costs were not too high on my parents. At university, I took up residence at Trinity College, which is one of the residential colleges at the University of Melbourne, because couldn't stay at home. We lived in Geelong, and it wasn't possible to get to university on a daily basis from Geelong, so we took up residence there. It was fortunately at the time when university fees under the Commonwealth scholarship arrangement were free, so there were no fees for university course, and I was fortunate to win a scholarship at Trinity, which paid for most of my residential costs. So it was a very fortunate time for me as in my university year. And studied physics and maths, and they were the subjects of my degree course. Life in Trinity was fascinating. I mean, we were busy on a formal level with having to dine in the dining room and wearing a black tie and an academic gown, which were requirements. We had formal sherry parties and port parties. We went to the school, rowing events, the formal events, but there was a very active informal life as well. I mean, as young lads, we were busy. We partied hard, and that was just the style. And it happens with all young people. We partied hard, lots of balls and dances and sporting events. We all played sport. We all enjoyed going out. So, busy time.
Can I just ask, was Trinity an all-boys college or was it mixed? And if it was mixed, were there many girls there in the 1960s?
It was all boys in my time. Well, formerly all boys. But there were stories of girls sneaking in, but I can't comment on that. It went co-ed after I left. It was associated with the college next door, which originally was called, I think, the Trinity Girls College. It became Janet Clark Hall, so we were mixed with them. But yeah, it was very much an all-boys environment. It was, yeah, and then I went...
Can I just ask also, when you were at university, were there many girls in the courses, or was it, because it was a science course?
No, there were not many. Look, I don't recall greatly. I don't recall, certainly I didn't socialise with the girls doing physics and maths, but there would have been some there. It wasn't exclusively boys. But yeah, there would have been a predominance of boys in those classes, which was not unexpected at that time. At the end of, I then moved on to postgraduate work, carrying on with physics, and I joined, the university had two physics departments. One was focusing on nuclear physics, which wasn't my interest. I went to the other one, which was associated with the university and the Air Force. Not that I was interested in the military, but its focus was on astronomy and atmospheric physics, and that's where I went and did a master's degree. And I was working on electronics, the early days electronics, and my project was to build a device to bounce radio waves off the ionosphere. So it was part of that sort of atmospheric radio research. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I didn't live in college for those last 2 years. I joined a group of other young blokes and we moved into a house together and shared a house in Fitzroy, which in fact was one that my elder brother had bought. So we lived, again, a very active party life at this hotel, not a hotel, this house in Nicholson Street, Fitzroy. And the one event I can remember strongly was we were very interested in Barry Humphries' work, and Barry Humphries had written about a character called Barry Mackenzie, a very ochre character, and a film came out called Barry Mackenzie, so we all as a group decided to go to it, and we all dressed up in Barry Mackenzie very ochre clothes for this big pre-film party, which we wrote ourselves off. Anyway, that's me here. This is my future wife, Anne, not her favourite photograph and two mates. But it was one of those events which typified the time when we were felt anti-establishment. We were breaking away from traditions, and we really got into the character of ochre life with a fair bit of liquid refreshment and singing and so on. That was an event that I strongly remember in my still university days, but now not in college, and not in the sort of paternal relationship we had with the college regulations. We were on our own, but we survived. I think we survived. I'm surprised we got to the movie. We went by tram after the party, and I remember one of my friends had some plastic vomit which he spilled into the foyer, which was typical of the sort of jokes that we played at that time. Not untypical of all young blokes. And yeah, it was fun. I'm trying to think of the other events at the time. Oh yes, in my last year of university, I got involved with the environment movement. And what triggered it was in fact two books which a friend had given me. American author Paul Ehrlich wrote the book called The Population Bomb. It was a bestseller at the time, and he was a biologist, and he was saying that we are overpopulated, we're consuming the world's resources, and disaster is around the corner. As a mathematician, I could entirely identify with the idea that you can't keep growing and consuming resources when there's only a finite number of resources on the planet. So the other book that came out about the same time was this one as a report to the think tank called the Club of Rome, a book called The Limits to Growth. And these books made an indelible impression upon me. I joined the fledgling little group called ZPG in Victoria, which was trying to promote information about us being overpopulated, trying to encourage small families.
Just clarify that ZPG
stands for Zero Population Growth. And we were a small group. Our boss, our head, the person who started in Australia was an obstetrician called Derek Llewellyn-Jones in Sydney. And we were the Victorian branch. We're only a handful of us, but we were quite concerned about the fact that humans were overpopulating the planet and consuming too many resources. So we formed the group. We would lobby. We produced leaflets, a regular newsletter, and give talks. I do remember one particular occasion. Well, we used to door knock as well with leaflets, trying to encourage people to take an interest in population growth. And one incident sticks in my mind. A film had come out, a Danish-American film called ZPG, Zero Population Growth. It was inspired by Paul Ehrlich's book, but it totally misrepresented his message, because his message was babies are banned. Not population growth should stop, but babies were banned. And in fact, if the story, it was a dystopian science fiction movie. If you had a child, you were executed. So a group of us rolled up at the cinema in the city to hand out leaflets and try and engage the moviegoers in a conversation about population growth. We absolutely failed. I mean, it's not possible to capture a moviegoer going with a story about something quite serious. Anyway, that was one of the protests I remember, because it was a time when the environment movement was still growing, with Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, Paul Ehrlich's book on the population bomb. But it wasn't that the movement hadn't got into serious protesting. It was just beginnings of it. But that message about humanity consuming too much resources is still with me. And as a retired person, I'm still campaigning on that matter. So that's my association with the movement at the time, the population growth.
And the situation now is much different to 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. But it's still a concern, isn't it?
Oh, the situation's worse. I mean, when I was growing up, when I was young, the population of the world was 2 billion. It's now 4 times that. So even back then, this is before the green revolution of fertilizers in a massive way. So we're feeding more people than we did back then. But we've gone from 2 billion to 8 billion people 4 times in my lifetime. So the situation is worse now. But this isn't an environmental video. This is a story of oral history, of family history. So I won't bore the audience about my lobbying.
No, but I think it's interesting, the comparison to your interests in the 1960s, and that's still relevant today.
It is, and it stuck with me. The other thing that I was involved with those years was music. Throughout my school years, I learnt the piano. My mother had. When I was in England for that 1 year, I was at boarding school in Devon. My best friend at school played the piano, so when I came back, I said to Mum, can we get a piano and can I learn lessons? And she bought a piano for £100, a second-hand piano. And throughout my secondary years, I learnt the piano and studied it seriously. And then when I went to university, I didn't take lessons anymore, but I still played on a casual basis, privately, rarely at an event. But I did join the band at college. And I was still playing. I mean, I'd moved on from classical music, which was what my lessons were all in, traditional. But I was doing Burt Bacharach, so I used to collect sheet music, Henry Mancini, Simon and Garfunkel. These are sort of the popular music at the time, which I would play on the piano. And then, the musical hair really engaged me. The songs of that time. I wasn't a hippie, but I loved the music at the time and played it. And the band...
Did you go to hair?
Oh, yeah, I certainly did, yeah. And the band I joined was at the college, and it was quite different in its attitude. It played modern music, but it played modern church music. The band was founded by Jim Minchin, not Jim Minchin, who had trained as a priest at Trinity College, because it was a priest training college as well as academic college. He started the band. He was a pianist in the band, but he had left, so I filled in the slot as the pianist of the band, and we had a trumpeter, trombonist. Our leader was the drummer, and we had a electronic bass, so a 5-piece band, and we'd play modern music by people like Sydney Carter, the modern hymns of the 1960s for church services. It was absolutely fun. I'm not musical, but I love doing it. I'm certainly not religious, but I still went along to the services when we played. So that was my short stint as a band player. It was lots of fun. After school, I remember at school, at university, we didn't have career guidance people. So the alternative was that employers would come to university to say, look, and they would be after, for example, science graduates. And so they would say, look, come and work for us. This is what we do. And there were people like the Ford Motor Company, General Motors, IBM, or companies like Shell. And because I worked in my physics area, the Bureau of Meteorology were there. There's a company called Schlumberger, an European company, on instruments for oil exploration. So they would come along and say, look, come and join us. And Schlumberger offered me a job. And their work was to provide all the electronic instrumentation for oil companies at remote drilling sites. Those are the things they put down the wells. So my background in electronics and physics suited it. But they had a precondition. I had to be unmarried. And I just got engaged to Anne, so I had to say no to the job they offered. It would have been an exciting job, but I said no. And instead...
I must say, this sounds like back in the 1960s, many women had to give up their jobs when they got married. This is the first time I've heard that a man couldn't accept a job if he was married.
It is interesting.
It is interesting.
Schlumberger was not prepared to send a man and his wife to remote Middle East at an oil well, so that was there. I understood it. So I took a job at Shell, the international oil company, as what they called their graduate program, which took you in, they tried you out in different spots. And the first spot was in their geology department, and I worked on seismic diagrams for the gas reservoirs in the Northwest Shelf, which was subsequently developed, but in those days we were just still exploring it. And then they moved me that was 3 months, then they moved me into the department they called Operations Research, which was where people with mathematical background would do the maths that managers weren't doing. We did forecasting, linear programming, stock control, the mathematics. And Shell had one computer at that time. It was a whole building. And we would program things in the computer and do the maths for the managers. And that department I stayed for many years, Operations Research.
Can I ask about the computers? Because in the 1960s, that was in the very early stages of computers, not how we know them today. And as you said, it took up a whole room. How long did it take you to run those programs? Was it like over a day to get a result?
I started in 1973. The computer actually occupied a whole building, and originally we would be designing a program using some very basic language like Fortran, and you'd spend almost all day preparing the programming cards. There were cards about this size, the size of a postcard, on a big machine that punched holes in it. Then you'd submit that to the computer in the end of the day, and you got your results back the next morning. So rather than instant result, it was overnight for the computer to do the calculations. And more often than not, you'd be still debugging your program, and you spent all these ages preparing a program which was doing probably one calculation, and it took you months to do one calculation. So I was using it to originally to forecast projections of oil, petrol sales and that sort of thing, because the managers, their best was a pen and ruler, and we could do better by saying, no, look, this curve fits this exponential line or this parabolic line or this linear line, and we can make it a bit accurate. It was a bit of snake oil work. I mean, believing that the future is just a projection of the past is something that certainly fell over because it was just at the time of the Middle East oil shock, and the trends didn't keep going the way they had gone in the past. So with hindsight, it was a silly work we did on forecasting using maths alone. That was the way it was. But the programs were very simple. It was many years before we moved into personal computers. Shell was a very colonial company. It is and was headquartered in London and The Hague in the Netherlands. It had been going for late 1800s. It started off. It followed the history of the motor car industry, and its attitude to employees was quite different than the attitude that most employers have now. When I was engaged, it was expected you would spend your entire working life at Shell. So they planned your lifetime career. And when you went in, as I did, they would map out what you might be doing. And they would move you from job to job, typically every 2 to 3 years. I had, I think, 12 positions in my 27 years with Shell. And they would map it out, kept making sure you moved into a job. And it brought new ideas into jobs, but also you learned things by changing positions, still within the Shell organisation. And they would promote you at a certain rate. And the rate they would promote you was based on the company's assessment of what your ultimate potential was. So they would assess from the people working with you and your boss what your ultimate final job might be, not the location, but the level. And they called this your ultimate potential. And then they would time your promotions to fit in with getting up the corporate ladder. An incredibly paternal attitude to employees. But that was the attitude of many companies at the time, certainly the big corporates.
I think also it was the expectation of people who took employment that if you worked for a company like that, you would work for them for the rest of your life.
That's right. And they would move you on. You didn't say, I don't want this job anymore, find another position. They would move you on. So very paternal attitude to lifetime employment. There were some significant fringe benefits because they would move you and pay for your move. They moved me to Canberra. They moved me to London. Anne was fully funded. They funded our accommodation. They paid us generously for the move. They paid for our holiday transfer back to Australia. So yeah, it was a significant fringe benefit. So Anne and I spent 3 years in London, courtesy of Shell. It was for 2 reasons we went there. One was part of their program of career progression, but they transferred me when I was still a 25-year-old, so quite early on. I'd only been with the company 18 months. And in the OR department, they were very impressed with one of their staff, a chap called Dick Bullock, Englishman, and he'd been to university in London, the Brunel University. And they said, Ian, we would like you to go to Brunel because we like Dick's work. So they sent me there also to do a postgraduate work part-time whilst I worked in the Shell London head office. So that were the 2 reasons. But look, we had fun at the expense of the company. I'm not sure how often that happens now, but it was a great way of being employed in its lifetime. Yeah, that doesn't happen today. It happened today.
No, I think from both sides, from the employer and the employee. The employer has no expectation that the person will stay, and the employee often looks to move.
That's right.
It's a very different attitude.
It is different, and consistent with that old-fashioned attitude, they had a generous superannuation scheme, and the payout was based on your final salary. So the expectation was you'd stay till you were 60 or 65, and then they would pay. It was a defined benefit scheme, which are quite rare now. So it wasn't based on the size of the fund, it was based on your final salary to pay you a level based on your final salary. The way they looked after your family and the way they trained you, often sent on training courses. So it was a very paternal attitude to their staff, which you just accepted at the time. It was the times. Yeah. What else can I say about the 1960s and 70s? I don't know. I might have had some more pictures. Oh, look, here's a picture of me in the London office. And so it illustrates two things. One is the office in London, the offices were closed off. So you walk down the corridor, it was nothing like open plan. It was entirely opposite to open plan. So I shared an office with another chap. And and also you can see that of the hairstyle at the time and the big sideburns and the moustache, that was the hairstyle of young blokes. So that's a 25-year-old in London.
I noticed that the ergonomic furniture is quite of the 1960s.
Oh, very much so, very much so. And the office, the quality of office depended on your level. And so if you'd been promoted, you would have been promoted from a shared office to a single person office. And if it had
a bigger desk, maybe?
A bigger desk, if you went to some stage, you'd have a mat in the middle. Then it was a next step up to have a fitted carpet and curtains. And I remember one chap saying he was promoted to an office which had been occupied by a more senior person. So they pulled out the carpet and pulled down the curtains because it wasn't what he was eligible for. Again, perhaps a military sort of hierarchy attitude to conditions of employment. Yeah. Leslie, I'm not sure what else I can say about the 60s and 70s.
Is there anything like the things that you can remember, like, so at university you were in science, which was quite a male-dominated area, but were you aware of like the feminist movement at all? Did you have any contact with that, or were you aware that women were trying to make a greater place for themselves?
It was. I mean, I was at university at the time at Germaine Greer. So the female eunuch was something everybody read, whether you were a boy or a girl. Yes, the feminist movement was really growing then, and I guess I know I was a supporter of it. Anne was a nurse, and so very aware that employment opportunities for females were much restricted, and that was something that needed to change. So yes, it was. Did I take active part in it? No, but I was empathetic with the whole movement, very much so, the feminist movement, yeah.
And I guess, do you recall, I know that you said earlier that your family, you know, when your brother was called up to the Vietnam Front, you just felt that was something but do you recall the protest, like the photo I remember from on the papers, I think it was Burke Street, where all the protesters
were there.
Do you recall that protest?
Very much. I didn't participate. I regret that because I consider myself a pacifist. But yes, a lot of my acquaintances were at the protest, and it was one of the earlier big protests in Melbourne against the Vietnam War. I did go to the protest against the Middle East problems, but not that one. Yeah, it was big. So yes, it was a time when there were a lot of social movements happening. When I mentioned the environmental movement, we've touched on feminism and the anti-war protests. It was a time when young people of my age were rejecting traditional values and traditional behaviour. We saw it as a new age. I mean, the classic case of that is the types of musicals we went to. It wasn't, West Side. It was a bit of West Side Story, but not sort of the early movies of which we'd see on our films nowadays. Very big change.
I forgot what I was going to ask you then. The Whitlam government. I guess you would have been finished university on your scholarship by that stage, so you basically had free education. But do you remember the Whitlam government and the changes they brought in?
I certainly remember Gough Whitlam campaigning. I went to one of his campaign rallies in St Kilda Town Hall, and his "It's time" words in the song. Yes, I was a supporter of him. But my overseas time with Anne coincided with the Whitlam years in government. I voted for him, but I'm not quite sure when he came in. But I was overseas in 1975 when his government was sacked. So I remember the dispute, but I was overseas at the time, so I didn't participate in the protests at the time. But a strong supporter of Gough Whitlam.
Was it a major story in England at that time, because the Queen ultimately spoke with the Governor-General that caused the demise of Beaufort. I mean, was that a story in England? Or?
Yes, but I wasn't, I didn't tap into it strongly. It's when I came back and, I was more aware of it after I came back. It would have been a story in England, but didn't dominate my consciousness, no. It was a time when you're fairly self-centred in what you do. I mean, I had my work. Anne and I, in England, spent a lot of time travelling. Every weekend we'll be in the car or hiring a camper van and travelling around, popping over to Europe. One of the great joys of being there is popping over to Europe for a week or so. And in fact, we had this comfortable company residence in the outer suburb called Shepparton. And many of my friends, it was a time when people would travel. Australians, they do their rite of passage, go to Europe for overseas trip. Well, where did my friends stay? With us, because we had a bed for them. So we had many, many visitors at our place. In fact, I'll share with you a story on that. We lived in Shepparton, quite close to the Shepparton railway station. It was the end of a line from Waterloo. I used to work at Waterloo, and it was at one line, so it was easy. I could get on the train, go to Waterloo, and I could go to sleep on the way home because the last stop was just outside my house. And many friends would come to stay with us, and they'd often go down to the local laundromat. We got a knock on the door one night, and opened the door, a face I didn't recognise, but an Australian accent. And the chap said, "Oh, I've just arrived, and I've been to the laundromat, and they say there's an Australian hostel here. Can I stay?" So it was a time when many young people travelled, and many of our friends and then new friends stayed with us at our company house. Yeah.
I think the late 60s, 1970s might have been a time where people felt, and I'm not sure this applies to you because your company sent you to England, but a lot of Australians thought they needed to go to England to do something better than they could achieve in Australia. Yeah. And I think that attitude's changed now.
I guess it still persists with people taking a gap year before they study. But the friends that visited us were post-university, not pre-university. But there was a desire to visit the old country and to travel in Europe. It was seen as more exciting than Australia. It was seen as culturally more diverse, which it was. So it was very common for boys and girls who could afford it to travel. And often they'd come across for a year and get part-time job in the local pub or restaurant and drop in on us. And some of those friends, and some of them were from my Trinity College days, are still lifetime friends for us. So the experiences we had in college, the experiences we had in England, have built strong friendships that have lasted to now.
The environment movement that you talked about, the zero population growth, I mean, the 70s also saw the time of environmental awareness of land, and like the Franklin River protests, and in Tasmania, the flooding of Lake Petter was another one. In Victoria, they had the builders' unions put green bans on buildings to preserve heritage buildings. Was that something that you took an interest in that time or were aware of?
I did. A lot of that happened towards the 80s. I did. By then I was working full-time in Shell. So I was working in a company which didn't entertain strong environmental attitudes. But I was very aware of it. And when I left Shell, I was there for 27 years, I became very active again in the environmental movement. In the nature preservation category, not just the population issue. And I took a role as I was the first Yarra River Keeper, a role I held for 9 years after I left Shell. I took a job with the state government first in restoring flows to the Snowy River. So the concept of protecting nature wasn't so much on my mind in the early days. I was more worried about survival of human species and its impact on the planet, not the others. But certainly post-Shell, I got actively involved in the nature preservation activities, and still am. Yeah, I was a counsellor on the Australian Conservation Foundation. I've been active with Environment Victoria, and I'm now old man, but I'm still campaigning.
It's fine. I think the conservation movement needs all the people that it can to protect our lands and our heritage.
Leslie, it needs all of us, because we're all at fault, and we are stuffing up the place, and we've got to fix it. It's just convincing our government to act accordingly that is one of the challenges.
I agree. Well, I think that's probably as much as you can remember and I can remember to ask you about the 1960s and 70s. So we might just end the interview there, and I thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.